Hi friends, my name is Nandita. I am from Andhra Pradesh.
Good morning dear students. Today we are going to discuss about locomotion and movement from chapter 20 biology class 11 CBSE syllabus. Children, let us discuss about human skeleton system. Humans are vertebrates. Animals have vertebral column or backbone. They rarely on a steady internal frame that is centered on a permanent spine. The human skeletal system consists of bones, cartilage, ligaments and tendons and account for about 20% of the body weight. The skeletal system is your body's support structure. It gives your body its shape, allows movement, make blood cells, provide protection for your organs and store minerals. The skeletal system is also called the musculoskeletal system. In human beings, the skeletal system is present inside the body, so it is called endoskeleton. Let us discuss about hydrostatic skeleton. The hydrostatic skeletons are located internally in cnidarians, annelids and those animals which can move by contracting the muscles surrounding the fluid-filled pouch, creating pressure within the pouch that cause movement. Human skeleton consists of 270 bones which are fused to become 206 and out of which 6 bones occurs as ear ossicles. The remaining 200 bones are divided into axial and appendicular skeleton. Children, let us discuss about axial skeleton. Axial skeleton comprises 80 bones distributed along the main axis of the body. The skull, vertebral column, sternum and ribs constitute the axial skeleton. Children, let us discuss in detail about skull. Skull. A bony part of our head is called skull. The skull is made up of 22 bony plates joined together. The skull is at the top of the vertebral column. It is composed of two main parts. One is cranium, second one is facial bones. Normally, the human skull has 22 bones, 14 facial skeletal bones and 8 cranial bones. The space containing the brain is the cranial cavity. The cavellarium or the skeletal vault is the upper part of the cranium, forming the roof and side walls of the cranial activity. The foundation of the skull is the lower part of the cranium, constitute the floor of the cranial cavity. The skull bones can be broadly divided into two main sections. Children, let us discuss in detail about the name of the bones which are present in facial skeleton. The name of the bone in facial skeleton, first one is mandibular, it is in one bone, and second one is vomer, it is also present one bone. Inferior conchae are present in two bones in facial skeleton. Palatine bones are two paired bones. Nasal bones are paired bones. Lacrimal bones are paired bones. Maxillae are paired bones, and zygomatic bones are also paired bones in facial skeleton. Now look into the cranium bones. Temporary bones, two bones which are paired. Peritial bones are also two bones, and optical bone is one, and sphenoid bone is one, ethmoid bone is one, frontal bone is one. Cranium skeletal system. The human face is made up of 14 bones. First, let us discuss about mandible. Mandible forms the strongest and largest facial bone. It compresses the body and two ramen. The U-shaped body has mental foramen situated on the outer surface near the root apex of the second and third premolars. The foramen's opening is led backwards, laterally transmitting the mental nerve and the vessels. On the outer line surface of the body of mandible, the symphysis ment constitute a halo rich in indicative of the line of fusing the two halves of the mandible at the same time of development. The line medial surface of the body of the mandible compresses to the mental spines, which gives rise to the genioglossus muscles and geniohyoid muscles. The monohyoid lines are oblique edges running laterally and backwards from the site of the mental spines to the region behind and below the third molar tooth. representing the attachment of the mollucoid muscle. The submandibular fossa is seen below the posterior section of the mylohyoid line for the sublingual gland, and the sublingual fossa is seen above the anterior section of the mylohyoid line. A small neck is inferior to the head. Children, let us discuss about vomer. It is a pole-shaped bone situated in the middle line of the nasal fossa. It forms the posterior part of the nasal septum. Not only that, but it is also mediates with the maxillary, ethmoid and palatine bones. Let us discuss about inferior concave. This structure is a paired one forming the bony assistance of the inferior turbinate bilaterally. It is of surgical significance in the event when it blocks the inferior meatus and the nasolacrimal duct. Children, let us discuss about palatine bones. These irregular shaped paired bones, each compressing a main horizontal part and a vertical perpendicular plate. The horizontal plate anteriorly mediates with the maxilla and with that of a palatine bone of the opposite side in the midline, forming the posterior component of the hard plate. The vertical plate superiorly passes behind the maxilla and posteriorly mediates with the lateral pterygoid plate of the sphenoid bone. This vertical plate ends in a small offering to the orbital floor at the posterior medial factor. It has two foramen, the lesser and greater palatine that lies in the posterior section of the plate, passing the lesser and greater palatine nerves and the vessels. Children, let us discuss about nasal bones. These are rectangular bones forming the bridge of the nose, articulating the frontal bone superiorly and with one another at the midline. It is comparatively thick at the superior articulation. Inferiorly, it is fine. This is a fracture prone site. These bones posteriorly mediate with the frontal process of maxilla. The anterior nasal aperture is formed by the lower borders with the maxilla. These are two nasal cavities divided by nasal septum that is constituted by the vomer. The perpendicular plate of the ethmoid and the sepal cartilage, the middle and the superior concave are edges of bones projecting into the nasal cavity from the ethmoid on the both sides. Children, let us discuss about lacrimal bones. These are the most fragile and the smallest facial bones and are located at the front part of the medial wall of the orbit. It is a paired bone anteriorly articulating with the frontal process of the maxilla and articulate posteriorly with that of lamina papyraceae of the ethmoid. It articulates superiorly with the frontal bone and the inferiorly with that of a orbital plate of the maxilla. This is a groove referred to as the lacrimal groove for the nasolacrimal duct seen in the anterior section of the lateral surface of the lacrimal bone. The lacrimal grooves unites anteriorly with the posterior periphery of the frontal process of the maxilla for the formation of the fossa that harbors the lacrimal sac. Children, let us discuss about maxillae. The both maxillae constitute the upper jaw parts at the lateral walls of the nasal cavities and the anterior sections of the hard plate and sections of the floors of the orbital cavities. The two bones unite in the midline at the antimaxillary structure forming the lower margin of the nasal apparatus. The infraorbital foramen penetrates the maxilla under the orbit. The alveolar process moves downwards and with the opposite side constitute the alveolar arch holding the upper teeth. Each of the hemimaxillas compresses the maxillary sinus, a big pyramid shaped body. Four evident processes: alveolar, frontal, palatine and zygomatic processes. Maxillaris body is hollow, compressing the maxillary sinus. Anterior walls of the sinus are facial surface of the maxilla and typically are thin. The middle wall is the lateral nasal wall. The sinus leads to medially and superiorly to the nasal cavity at the middle meatus. The superior roof of the sinus is the orbital floor, the sinus floor is the palatine, and the alveolar process of the maxillum. The maxilla posteriorly mediates with the lacrimal bone, forming the anterior part of the medial orbital wall. Children, let us discuss about zygomatic bones. It is a strong, thick and diamond-shaped bone forming the anterior and lateral projections to the midface and compresses four processes. The zygoma is a paired bones constituting the prominence of the cheek. The frontal process constitutes the lateral orbital wall and mediates with the frontal bone at the front zygomatic suture. The temporal process constitutes the zygomatic arch mediating with the temporal bone. The maxillary process mediates with the maxilla, forming the infraorbital rim and a section of the floor of the orbit. The fourth process unites with the maxilla on the lateral wall, generating the zygomatic distinction. The zygoma mediates with the sphenoid bone on the posterior component of the frontal process. The articulation is with the higher wing of the sphenoid bone constituting the lateral wall of the orbit. The zygomatic temporal and the zygomatic facial foramen are the only foramen of the zygomatic bone. Both these branches of the second division of the trigeminal nerve passes from inside the orbit to the face and provides sensory innervation to the structures associated. Children, let us discuss about cranial bones. The cranium or skull is made up of 8 bones that protect the brain and form the head. The cranium, also known as neurocranium, is formed by the superior aspect of the skull. It encloses and protects the brain, meninges and cerebral vasculature. Anatomically, the cranium can be subdivided into roof and a base. Let us see what is a cranial roof. Cranial roof compressed of the frontal, occipital and 2 parietal bones. It is also known as calvarium. Let us see what is cranial base. Cranial base compressed of the frontal, sphenoid, ethmoid, occipital, parietal and temporal bones. These bones articulate with the first cervical vertebrae, atlas and the facial bones and the mandible jaw. Children, let us discuss in detail about each and every cranial bone. First, let us see what is frontal bone. Frontal bone forms the forehead. It is a single bone constituting the anterior part of the calvaria and the higher third part of the forehead. The bone laterally mediates with the zygoma at the frontozygomatic suture. In its vault, it is coronal suture. It mediates with the parietal bones. This bone constitutes a great part of the orbit's roof. The thickening of this bone in the anterior part constitutes the superciliary arches. The curved altitudes provides evidence of the eyebrow. This rim is crossed over by the supraorbital notch transisting the frontal vessels and nerves. The bone compresses the air sinuses, 2 hollow spaces that are lined with mucous membrane found immediately above the orbital margins. The paranasal sinus is mucous membrane with the lining of the air-filled bones cavities. These are the frontal, maxillary, ethmoid and sphenoid paranasal sinuses. It mediates with the nose, serving the lightening of the facial skeleton, acting as a voice resonators. This was a brief on skull bones, different types. Children, let us discuss about parietal bones. 2 bones that protect the brain and from the majority of the skull. These are 2 flat bones constituting most of the vault of the skull. It mediates with one another in the midline at the sagittal suture. It mediates anteriorly with the frontal bone at the coronal suture. It site of the joint between the coronal suture and the sagittal suture referred to as to be rigma. These bones posteriorly mediate with the occipital bone at the lamboid suture at the site of joining the sagittal suture with the lamboid suture referred to as the lambda. The bones laterally mediate with the squamous temporal bone at the squamous suture. They have paired foramen which is referred to as the parietal foramen and have a Children, let us discuss about temporal bones. Temporal bones. These bones are paired structures at the base and lateral sides of the skull. Each of these bones compresses this process and parts. Tympanic section compresses the lateral auditory meatus, and zygomatic part process constitute the zygomatic arch with the temporal process with the zygomatic bone. And petrous part found in the foundation of the skull. It harbors the internal acoustic meatus and structure of the inner ear. The mastoid process is deemed as the downgrowth from the petrous section and both referred as to petromastoid. Styloid process. This styloid process provides attachment to the ligaments and muscle. Squamous part forms the most superior located and largest section of the temporal bone. It unites the parietal bone to that of the squamous structure, constituting the part of the petrion. The canals of the foramen are present in the bone area. The external acoustic meatus, carotid canal for foramen lacerum, stylomastoid foramen, internal acoustic meatus, and facial nerve canal. The temporary bones mediate with the mandibulary bone via the temporomandibular joint. The temporal bones glenoid fossa mediates with the condylar head of the mandible. The anterior periphery of the glenoid fossa is the articulate eminence. Children, let us discuss about occipital bone. The occipital bone protects the back of the brain and supports the head. These are unpaired trapezoid bones that are the main bones of the occiput back of the skull. It constitutes a major part of the basilar section of the neurocranium and the cerebellum fully. The bone superiorly mediates with the parietal bones at the lumboid suture, forming a section of the wallet of the skull. It is only the cranial bone inferiorly to the mediate with the cervical spine. It mediates with the sphenoid anteriorly at the base of the skull. This bone comprises three parts: basilar part, squamous part, condylary part. Out of this, the squamous part is the largest one. It is seen posterior to the foramen magnum and is curved from over to downwards. The outer surface has external occipital protuberance and three curved lines called nuchal lines. The superior nuchal lines and the highest nuchal lines run somewhat inferiorly. Further running inferior is the inferior nuchal line. The new internal surface of the squamous section is indicated by the grooves on the internal surface as a result of the venous cranial sinuses, that sigmoid sinuses, transverse sinuses, and the superior sagittal sinuses. The basilar part is seen anterior to the foramen magnum and the next to the petrous section to the temporal bone. It mediates anteriorly with the sphenoid bone. The condylar section is seen lateral to the foramen magnum. It has two kidney-shaped projections which mediate with the first cervical vertebrae. The jugular foramen is seen between the occipital bone and the petrous section of the temporal bone. The hypoglossal nerve leaves the neurocranium via the hypoglossal canal that penetrates through the condylary section of the occipital bone. Children, let us discuss about sphenoid bone. These sphenoid bones support facial muscles. These are single bones located at the center of the skull foundation and are a portion of the middle and anterior cranial focussae. It has several processes which are intricate articulations with the facial and cranial bones found adjacent to it. It mediates with the ethmoid, temporal, frontal, occipital, parietal, zygoma, ulnar, palatine bones and at times to tuberosity of the maxilla. These bones resembles the shape of the butterfly with a great laser ring to the body and the petrigoid plates. Additionally, it has numerous foramen and fissures, optical canal, foramen ovale and the superior orbit fissure. Its body is hollow, forming two cavities distinguished by a fine bony spectrum. The hollow cavities are the symphonoidal air sinuses draining into the superior nasal meatus. On the body's superior surface is the depression for the pituitary gland, referred to as a Sella turcica. The body is seen on the roof of the nasal cavity. Children, let us discuss about ethmoid bone. The ethmoid bone forms the eye socket structure and protects the nose. It is a single bone seen in the midsection of the anterior cranial fossa. It establishes a section of the anterior cranial fossa, nasal structure, and middle orbit walls, the crista gallia in the anterior cranial fossa. A bony upward projections provides the attachment to the flexor cerebrae. The ethmoid plate that is perpendicular slopes downwards in the midline of the nasal cavity, constituting the anterior and superior part of the nasal septum. The posteriorly it mediates with the vomer and with that of the septal cartilages, establishing the nasal septum. The cerebriform plates of ethmoids mediate laterally and anteriorly with the frontal bone and posteriorly with the sphenoid bone. The olfactory nerve filaments advance via the ribriform plate. This bone is a pneumatic bone containing ethmoid air cells that drain into the middle of the superior nasal meatus.